You're listening to Dropping Pins, a story-based learning series from the Okayest Hunter podcast, hosted by Derek Melkor, and aimed at helping you hone your whitetail hunting skills. You'll hear the aha moments when known and unknown proven whitetail killers started consistently putting mature bucks on the ground.
All right. Hello there, everybody. Derek here from the Dropping Pins podcast, one of the segments on the Okayest Hunter podcast network. Excited to sit down with another big buck killer, chaser, tracker tonight. It's kind of cool because this is actually the second tracker we've had on the podcast in a row. So really excited to sit down with not only an accomplished hunter, but an accomplished taxidermist, an educator, someone who's really helped bring a new generation of hunters into a style and culture of hunting. The guest that we have tonight is from the New England, the Northeast area, and has really spent most of their life dedicated to the animals of that area, including whitetail deer. Tonight, we're going to be talking to Rodney Elmer, who he and his family run an amazing YouTube channel. They've got a mountain deer webpage where they've got a blog, tons of different learning things on there for all sorts of different hunters. Their YouTube page features all kinds of cool hunts, tracking stories. And one of my favorite parts about it is that it is a community and family event. They bring in their friends. Rodney brings his sons. His wife runs the taxidermy business with him, as far as I can see, which is awesome. And they teach hunter safety classes out of their business in the Northeast. So someone who not only is a big buck killer, but has dedicated a lot of their life to educating and helping others. I'd like to welcome Rodney Elmer to the show. Rodney, thanks for joining us tonight. How you doing?
I'm doing fantastic.
Are you in your taxidermy shop right now?
Yeah. It's 9:30 in the evening. My day's pretty well come to an end, and time to take it easy. And this is a good way to do it for sure.
Yeah, I appreciate it. I know it's later on the East Coast there. It's 8:30 here. So thank you for sitting down with us tonight. Anyone who's heard of you before, seen your videos and your family's videos, I know your sons help out a lot, which when you get to make hunting videos with your sons, that's a pretty cool setup there. But they've probably seen a little bit of that. Yeah, what a cool setup. I guess I'll hand it over to you in a second, and you can talk a little bit about your family if you want. But the first question that I ask all the guests, just give us a little bit of background. I mentioned New England there, but a little bit of background in the terrain and, kind of the land that you grew up and cut your teeth hunting, and maybe like a little bit of what you hunt now, if it's the same or different. So.
Yeah. Well, Teresa and I are both 10th generation Vermonters. Like, we've been in Vermont for 10 generations. Before Vermont was a state, it was part of the New Hampshire grants. That's how long we've been here. Central Vermont is basically like the center of the Green Mountains, which run up and down the state. And they're a lot of like 2,200 footers up to like 3,400 or 3,500 foot mountains. So, they're medium, big size mountains, especially for the Northeast. Most of the mountains in the Northeast, like the biggest is 4,000, 5,000 is about it. But most of them are right around 3,500 feet. So they're big, soft, old Appalachian mountains, got lots of hardwood on them. We've been deer hunting. I cut my teeth right in the local town, right just outside of it, running around the farm country. There was a lot of farms when I was young, and now of course the farms aren't quite as much, and a lot of them have turned into, a lot of that area that was farm country is now turned into forest. So the majority of our woods are hardwood forest, a lot like where you guys are. So we see tons of hardwood forest everywhere that there is softwood forest, and we have a lot of snow. It's not unusual for us to have 3 feet or 4 feet of snow sometimes in the winter. So yarding areas are a big deal, and the forest is a big deal for the deer to, be in the right carrying capacity for what the land has. And with such good, fairly rugged winters, our deer tend to be a little bit bigger. And it's just a hop, skip, and a jump. To most of us will drive a couple, 3 hours to go deer hunting. I drive 3 hours just to go to the beach. So, like, it's not a big deal to make it into the other New England states and hunt them. And the boys and I will hunt Maine mostly. We love to hunt Maine the most. there's the most room up there. But New Hampshire too has a ton of space. The White Mountains in New Hampshire are really good, and of course the Green Mountains in Vermont are good. Vermont's probably got 700,000 or 800,000 open acres of land
Wow.
where the public can go and hunt. So there's quite a bit of space to hunt. In general, Vermont probably has some of the smaller kind of deer. Vermont's population is crazy deer hunters. We're 15% of our population deer hunts.
That is a
Like
pretty
Maine
stout
is 6.
number.
Yeah, Maine is 6, and I think New Hampshire is 6, and here we are almost double both the other two states. So like hunting is a big culture. Even my taxidermy business is based on the hunters more than the quality of deer we have. We have like 110-pound does and 170-pound 4-year-old bucks. We don't have the big, gigantic, lots of older deer, especially because we hunt so hard. We have, in general, a lot of smaller buck. We don't have a lot of great big buck. There's not very many of those. I think we might have shot maybe a couple, 3, 4 Boone and Crockett's, like legitimate good Boone and Crockett's that are current and up to date kind of thing.
Wow.
Like we don't shoot a lot of big deer. It's just
Do you
not
think?
deer. We hunt them hard.
Yeah. Do you think? And I'm sure it does, but just for folks like here in the Midwest, we're just sitting and waiting most of the time, right? It's like not as much of an active hunt as say tracking. And I know when you guys have snow up in the Northeast, tracking is the preferred method for a lot of hunters. And do you think maybe that's because I feel like in tracking, you're being selective about like what you're actively hunting. So you can kind of pick and choose, you're judging it on a track, but folks who've been doing it for a long time, like you're probably picking out the oldest age class bucks to target. Whereas if you're sitting at a tree stand, after sitting there for 4 or 5 days, not seeing Jack, the 3-year-old comes along and is like, well, yeah, that one's going to do just fine. So do you think the method of like tracking being popular is one of the reasons the older age class bucks maybe aren't as
A
hot?
little bit, if anything, it may be the low numbers of deer in general. Like if you
Gotcha.
take deer per square mile, when you don't have very many deer and you go out and sit, you might be sitting in the middle of nowhere and no deer are going to go by you. So when you have snow on the ground, you got a buck there, right? You're getting real time information about that area, about that particular deer. Even, you come across a track in the snow and the snow's only 12 hours old. You're in at least a starting of where he is. So with so many miles, square miles of very few deer, sometimes like in Maine, it's not unusual to have 3 or 6 deer, sometimes 7 or 8 deer per square mile at the most. So like when you have so many acres of just not good woods, and if you just went out and sat down, and with so few deer around as it is, and then in particular when you want to target a bigger buck, it gets even harder because there's even fewer of those, right? They might make up, like a mature buck in the Northeast might make up usually less than 5% of the population if you're looking for a 5-year-old.
Wow.
So only 5 out of 100 deer, bucks wise, will make it to that age. And of course, because the winters are so harsh, we keep a fairly high doe to buck ratio. There's a lot of does per buck just to help keep the population up because of the hard winters. So we do this trade-off of trying to keep plenty of does on hand so that there's a decent, stable, good population if we get some real, hard back-to-back winters or something like that. But winter is the biggest limiting factor here. And then all those acres with nothing in it. And if you just went out and looked for a little bit of buck sign and set up a tree stand, boy, you might see 1 or 2 bucks in a whole month of hunting. So, and even then, the chances of it being a real big one is not so good because there's so many hunters that are after them that they're all really smart. Like when you have a high population of good hunters, they make your deer population wise. And then when they make it to 5 years old, they've run the gauntlet so many times that they make it to a 5-year-old. You've really accomplished something because they're wild deer. And when you take down the barriers of land development and like posters and stuff, and you just can go hunting and it's just go. Well, now they get chased quite a bit, and you don't have the protection that you would get if it was a a posted property, or, you know, there was off limit areas like in a city or something. So like and I'm not saying it's all wide open and just go crazy, because it's definitely not that way, but we have more open land than you would have in other places. And that puts the pressure on the deer, because now we can follow them. You take a buck and you start chasing him, you're going to educate him. If you don't kill him, he's going to be smarter. And you keep coming
Just harder
back,
to train
and then
the next
your
time.
neighbor
Yep.
chases him the next day, and then a guy from Massachusetts chases him the next day. Like by the end of the season, boy, he is on it. He is not going to make hardly any mistakes at all. He hears one little twig at 100 yards and he's gone. And they see a trail camera, they won't even approach it. Like they're on it. They're super crazy wild. They're real wild deer. And it's
They
different.
are, yeah, they are
Like
masters of the survival game, right? And then, like you said,
100%.
just with, oh man, they're good. Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off there.
No, that's exactly the way it is. That is exactly the way it is. They are masters where they are, and it makes them extra wild, extra cagey. And of course, they usually remember, if you don't kill a buck, and he's just getting more educated every day. Every day that goes by, every escape that he makes from a coyote, that he makes from a person, he manages to dodge a truck. All them things make him smarter every day, every day. And of course, he'll develop. They always worked. Everything he ever did to escape always worked. So he'll develop that routine of escape that just keeps working over and over and over again. And he'll learn to just go. And some of them are just walking son of a guns. It's not an easy thing to just say, well, I'm gonna find a buck, go crazy trying to pattern him, set up a tree stand, and do all that. It's a lot of work to get a deer, to get a big deer. But it's also a lot of work to follow him all the time. Like I don't put much time into scouting. I don't put much time. I don't mess with trail cameras. I don't care about any of that stuff. If there's a big one and he was there the year before, odds are good he's still going to be there in the future here. And so you end up getting these like legend bucks that you knew, and you knew his habits and his circles, and you go back after him the next year. And eventually he makes a mistake. He steps in front of somebody and he might die. But also too, you might get him, and the reward is so off the charts when you get a buck that you've chased and jumped and moved and ran, and you still got him at the end of the day, or at the end of like 2 year or 3 year span of trying to get him. Like the fellow there, Donnie Vincent, right? And he shoots that buck Steve, like he had so much time in it. That kind of stuff like is legendary, and those are the kind of hunts you remember forever. And I think
there's no other feeling.
Yeah, it's probably the most rewarding way to get a deer is to walk up to him on his terms and shoot him.
I 100% agree. Well, that's the one thing, right? Like the trackers you love, it's the saying you hear, but you always know where the buck is. Once you find the track, you know where he is. He's at the end of that track. But where that's going to take you, as you mentioned, and as you were kind of explaining that scenario where, every time you bump a buck, he's learning a new little tactic, or he's, securing his exit routes. And I think when you said multiple, you go back year after year, those deer learn what areas are best to evade hunters or to do this. And I think that's where the hunter gets a little bit, I don't even want to call it an advantage, but where if you're an intuitive hunter and you learn from, your previous mistakes, where if you know this big buck's going to take you up into this real rocky area, and then he's going to do this because he can, get the advantage. I think that like eventually, you play the chess game enough, what's going to come. So maybe if you're intuitive enough, you start to play the deer on his own turf, right? Like that's how you get lucky. And sometimes you do it lucky, but I mean, that's about the only chance you got, because that's a tough game to play.
It's really one-on-one a lot of times, not that he couldn't have a doe with him, and now you have, or two or three, and now you have two or three deer on the one person, right? You'll have that scenario too. Like there'll be all kinds of different scenarios that will show up, but like it's an arena for a gladiator that is like tons of chaos, and you don't know what it's going to happen. And some bucks, and the way they behave and the patterns that they use to work the land, to work by all the people, and to get away from you as well. to keep doing what they always do. It's an amazing thing to just take after a buck and follow him. And when he knows you're coming, continue following him and keep trying to find where he slowed down and stopped and looked for you. It's like you have to have the ultimate concentration and awareness. You have to be physically fit. You have to be able to walk pretty good. Doesn't mean that he'll run a long ways. Doesn't mean that you don't have a chance. A lot of guys will jump a deer and they'll say, "Oh, it's over." And most of tracking is killing when you first meet them. That first time you find the track, you follow it up, you get up to him, or you even see a satellite buck, a different buck, and you say, "Oh," and you might even think it's him, and it's not, right? They've done a whole bunch of do-si-do because they came into an area where there's a doe and heat. There's been all kinds of traffic, and you're ciphering out and reading the book of the ground, right? That's what the tracking part is you're reading the ground, determining what has been happening there, taking your best educated guess as to what's going to happen next, ciphering out those barnyards, hooking around and trying to find him, trying to speed up and be in the zone where he is so that you can actually hunt. Sometimes when they're doing that zombie walking from like November 5th or 6th or 8th, over through to the 15th, and the does aren't in heat, but the bucks have their walk on, and they just keep walking and walking and walking mile after mile, checking does and checking country and checking the other buck sign and bothering other bucks, and like all the miles that they might walk in a 3 or 4 day window. Sometimes there's never even a bed. I think we had 4 days last year with 7 guys with snow, and we never saw a buck bed down for 4 days straight because they were all on their feet and they were all looking and they were just rotating and eating and just go, go, go. So like the different phases of the rut where that particular buck likes to roam and the areas, the doe groups that he goes and checks, you learn about how far a deer can walk. You learn about how much land he uses, and you learn about the way he uses the land. And of course, your job is to take all those patterns and overlap them, like where other hunters are, where the terrain is, where the tree types are. You're trying to blend all these different patterns together like a bass fisherman. Right? He arrives at the lake and he looks it over and he figures out what color the pumpkin seed's like. And then he goes, kunk, 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 and boom, and he's got one. It's that same kind of, overlapping pattern, big arena, handle anything that comes along, figure it out. You've got all your stuff on you and you're out for the day. I might sometimes be 12 miles from where they drop me off. At the end of the day, I'm 10 or 12 miles away from there in another block of woods, still on that same deer. So it goes to show, that part of it is exciting and it's adventuring as well.
I swear I swear we'll get to a story here in a minute, but I like where this is going. And I mean, Rodney, you're just making it sound so easy. This is not easy. Everything he's saying, I mean, this is what it's like hunting deer in vast areas of big woods. And when you talked about the zombie walk, that was something I was thinking about when you were talking about deer densities. Northern Wisconsin, we have a lot of big woods. We've had some storms come through in the last 6 or 7 years, some straight line windstorms. A lot of our public lands up there are national forest, and they weren't being logged for ever and ever, held up in courts in California, no logging. And so the woods was just becoming absolutely desolate. It's all mature. There's nothing for these animals to eat. You could drive for miles and miles and miles and not cut a track all winter. And if you have areas of mature timber like that, when you were talking about before the buck and doe ratio and bucks looking for, does, just think about how much further a deer has to travel when there's fewer deer, and your doe groups are, instead of one every 600 yards, there's one every mile and a half. There's, you know what I mean? Like, and you get on a track not knowing that, if you're not familiar with the area, you may have a 15-mile day ahead of you without knowing it, just because of that's how the deer lay in that area. Whereas, I don't know, do you guys have a lot of logging in the areas you hunt? Is that an area that I would assume you get doe groups to congregate a little bit more food here and there?
Some, a lot of where the deer congregate is mostly like these yarding areas. There's fairly large softwood valley bottom, someplace where they're out of the wind, they're out of the snow. There's a pretty good canopy everywhere to protect them in the wintertime. And then in the summer, they spread out from those yarding areas, and they might go 20 miles. Their
Wow.
summer home might be 20 miles from where they spend the winter. So they'll go way up into the mountains and spread out all over the landscape, all over the place, and get used to being there. And then when the snow starts getting deep, all of a sudden, all the deer on the landscape will start heading, down a big, huge valley and end up probably sometimes 10 miles from where they were to concentrate for the winter. So like there's those hubbed areas of deer yards are where a lot of the population will spread out and go. Now, if you have mild winters and they don't necessarily have to go back to that deep snow deer yard, they may stay way back in the mountains. So like we'll sometimes get a huge winter or two in a row where the snow is super deep, and those deer that didn't go to the traditional yard may die out in the woods someplace way out there and not make it, and then have to work their way back down. Now the logging, the role that the logging plays is that it makes a lot of new successional forest, which is really good. You get lots of low brush. There's lots more food in that way. And of course, it will generally try and grow into hardwoods. Most of ours, if you just cut it and leave it, hardwoods will want to take right over. Your poplar, white birch, stuff like that will just take right over. So the softwood belts, some of the companies, a lot of it is timber company land, especially in Maine. Most of Maine is timber company land, which is public access for the most part. And they'll cut big sections of it or circles. They'll do a lot of big, good sized circle cuts. And then of course, every year when we go back to, we use probably a 200 square mile area. So we'll go back, and the first thing I want to know is learn where they're logging this year, where they're cutting in that general area, and how it might affect it. Now, of course, any woods that you go back to, whether it's your backyard or a big chunk of woods, and you go back repeatedly year after year after year, and especially when you're used to looking at so much acreage from a vehicle, right? We have road access to most all of that land. So we can drive through the mountains and see the cuts, see the terrain, see the types of everything that's out there. And then see where the age of the right proper cuts are, right? Like a 3-year-old clear cut with those red whips poking up. That's good stuff. So we can tell where some of the food is. And when we haven't had high winters, then the population will be fairly good and it'll be spread out on the landscape, and it's a little more predictable. When we get slammed, now we get down to just like maybe 100 deer in 30 square miles. So
Wow.
like now they're really hard to find. And when we do have the snow and we have a buck that likes a particular mountainside and he hangs out on that mostly, but he does go ranging, in a 5-mile loop out around checking some does in different spots. It might only be one doe that hangs out on one road, and he'll go down and check that doe, right? So all of a sudden we're going miles and miles trying to figure out where he is at that time. Which, bucks can go crazy trying to breed does where there's a high population, but they can go crazy when there's only two, right? Because they need to find one. They get that, I need to find one. So they just keep going and going. When you're following them and they're in that go, go, go mode, oh, is it tough? But if he finds a doe, he's likely to be there someplace. The first week in November, if you find some sign, you find some scrapes and rubs, odds are good he's right there within a quarter mile of the sign. So we'll walk through the woods and find a bunch of decent buck sign that looks pretty good, and then we'll focus on that spot. It'll help us narrow down those miles with nothing in them, which is a tough part. But also too, it makes it less tough. It's the best method for hunting low deer numbers. Nothing beats hunting low deer numbers better than tracking, and especially if you have snow on the ground. The snow just is an up-to-date, like blank slate that you can suddenly say, oh, he's on this road. And of course, we have tons of truck access, especially in Maine. Not so much in Vermont, but mostly in Maine. And when we can drive a road and he crossed this road and went up on that mountain, well, that's where we're going, right? So somebody will hop out and start up and go up the track, and then the rest of us will drive and keep looking and hopefully come on to another buck somewhere else. And by the end of the day, we might all be 20 miles apart from each other. And then at the end of the day, I cut back down and they're going to pick me up on that road down there somewhere at the end of the day. So we're spread out on the landscape. So you have to be good at navigating and communicating and whatnot, but it's a lot of fun. And that part of the adventuring of it makes it really good. That's the part I really wanted to do. When I started hunting when I was young, it was, through the neighborhood, behind the houses. There's a little gully over here where there's a bunch of deer in it, and let's go in as teenagers. We'll go in there with our 30-30 lever action and do a little drive, and they'd all come popping through, right? And I had a doe permit, and boom, and you got one, and you're all happy about it. And then I saw one of those giant bucks from Maine come in to my neighbor's place, and it was 220, and it was 130-inch 8-pointer laying on top of the roof of the Jeep, and that was the biggest deer I'd ever seen in my whole life. And all we had was magazines back then, and that was as big as anything I'd ever seen in my whole life, bigger than anything I'd seen in a magazine. So I saw that, and I said, boy, I got to go to Maine. So that got the ball rolling for me to want to go to places like that. And then when you've got a chance of shooting a buck that could weigh 250 pounds, that is a huge buck. And of course, the Northeast is all worried about the weight of the deer. And most of that comes from logging camps. In the early days when they had logging camps, a hunter would get paid for the venison that he brought to the logging camp by the pound. So that's why the Northeast is so crazy about the weight of the deer. It kind of became a tradition that if you shot a 200-pound buck, it was double what a couple of 100-pounders were worth. So you put the energy into that bigger one, you got a bigger prize for it, dollar-wise. And that is kind of held the tradition. And that's how that 200-pound thing kind of got going. If you shoot a buck that weighs 200 pounds anywhere, that is a huge deer. The deer itself is just humongous. Our racks in the Northeast, we have some, but we don't have, a lot of that Midwest beautiful 10-point stuff. We don't have that. If we got a 110-inch 8-pointer, we're all happy about that, right?
Hell yeah.
Like, it doesn't matter, so it is what it is, I guess. But that first trip or two to Maine was just amazing for me, because the chances of shooting something that was almost twice as big as what I would shoot at back home. And then when I actually shot him and he was 205 pounds on my first trip, he laid there, and I was looking at him, and I said to my buddy on the radio, I said, this thing belongs in a magazine. Wow, is this thing huge? I can't believe the size of it, And when you understand that you can get a big one, and then when you do follow him up and you come around the corner, you look around over the hill just a little bit, and there he is standing there, and you just slide up nice and easy and put it right on him, and bang, and you shoot that thing. Oh, what a feeling that is. It's exceptional.
That's so cool. I had never heard the logging camp buying the venison. I've never heard that before. I mean, a lot of people know the Northeast and the weight, and the Midwest guys all go, wait, what? You got a 190? Like, they're thinking antlers, 190 inches, but everyone's talking pounds, which is cool. But that totally makes sense that it was, buying it for the loggers. Like, where are you going to get food when you're out logging in, the middle of freaking backwoods Maine? You take off the land. That's a really cool story. And I feel like that's a perfect little transition there. You mentioned heading up into Maine, as a young man.
Yep.
So now, Rodney, I'm wondering if you have, I mean, it's tough with, coming up on the spot, but do you have any, specific stories or something that it just made you realize or think, or a deer did something that you just didn't expect, or something that, as a hunter who maybe, has less experience, obviously, than what you've accrued through the years, that could take a little bit and have a little learning moment, and you could just take us along on a little story?
Well, there's always bucks that stick in your mind. Sometimes they're not even the biggest ones or whatever, but they're like a special buck. And maybe even some of the ones that got away are sometimes really special.
Of course. Those ones have taught me the most by far.
Sure. And I always learn. I'm pretty good at learning what not to do, right? Which is that's a long learning curve. And that was the case for me. I found a little small buck. I would take any buck track. If I was sure it was a buck, I would take it. And I followed a small buck for probably a quarter mile, and he bedded down in some spruces on a side hill. And it was beautiful, perfect snow, 8 inches, and quiet, and still snowing a little bit. And I worked up to that little buck. It was during a muzzleloader season here in Vermont. And
what time of year is that? December?
Yeah, December. Yeah, the first week in December. Yep.
Okay.
And I had already shot the big deer in Maine, and I came back home to Vermont. And as I'm pulling up the hill on this smaller buck, and I'm looking at the little track, and I said, he's not that great, but it's all I got, and he's right here. And the conditions looked like it was going to snow real hard for the rest of the season, and we only have a 9-day season. So like this might be it. I might have to work with him, but let's go see what he's got on it for headgear. So I go sneaking up to him, and I get like 15 feet from him, and he jumps out of his bed and takes off. And out of the corner of my eye, I see a little small, like 9-inch spread basket rack, 2-year-old, and he jumps off and up the hill. And I thought, well, if I can get him someplace where I can get a good shot, but I'm not going to go too crazy on him, right? So I'm like, okay. So I keep following him. He takes me out around the mountain about a half a mile. And then he's side hilling all the way around, keeping about the same elevation. And we're about a third of the way off the top. And as he's hooking around the mountain and I'm following him, and he's going from spruce thicket to open hardwoods where you can see almost a couple hundred yards, and then back into spruces again. And then all of a sudden he does a 90-degree turn. He just all of a sudden turns 90 degrees and goes straight up the hill. And I felt the wind direction change right almost just before that. So I instantly thought, well, he smelled something. Now, either there's a hunter in front of him and he didn't want to run into him, or there's something else up the hill he's interested in. So I started hunting, right? As soon as they do that 90-degree turn, time to pay attention. So I take him up the hill nice and easy. And as I'm going up through there, and I break through the spruce thicket, but I do it super slow, and I'm looking in the open, right? If you jump into a hole with a deer, he's going to be out the other side. So you don't want to go into it with him. You want to look into it and see him. So I'm looking into it, and I saw a deer up there about 60 yards or so, and it's standing. So I said, oh, there he is right there. Well, this ought to be just about perfect. So I keep the tree. It's just his hind end sticking out, and there's a tree right on his head and chest. So I keep that tree right there, and I come out in the open just a little bit where I can stand and get a good shot.
Is that body like in the spruces, on the edge of the spruces? You can see
No,
just
he's
his
right
legs
out
and his
there,
hind
right
end?
out in the hardwoods, right in the open.
Okay.
Just standing there sideways, and I'm like, boy, I had a boy. And it looks like a good size. I'm like, wow, that looks pretty good size. Maybe he's a little bigger than I thought he was. Well, I lean out a little bit, and no, it's not him. It's a big one. And the big one is just standing there looking at me. Well, that little buck had smelt that big one laying down on the hill up there and had turned towards him. A lot of deer, that especially where coyotes can pester them on a steady basis, they learn to use other deer to get rid of the coyote, right? A buck will run to a group of does to get rid of a hunter as well. And this buck ran up towards that other buck. So now I'm looking for the small buck, and I don't see him anywhere, but that big one is standing there, and I'm like, attaboy. So I pull back the hammer on that old CBA Frontier, right, that old piece of junk. And I'm like 21, and muzzleloaders were new back then. Like we just barely had started muzzleloader season. And I pull that thing back with that percussion cap piece of junk on it, right? And I lean out on that thing and I put it right on him. And I pull the trigger, and he's standing broadside, and his neck he's turned towards me, and it goes right under here, right under his neck, and it goes into the snow right next to him. And he doesn't move. And the smoke clears, and he's still standing there. And I go, oh, right? So I put my gun down, and I start loading that thing, and I'm swearing at myself, oh, man, and he's just standing there. And I'm like, attaboy. And at the time, I didn't grunt to deer. I later on, I learned to grunt and call to deer while I'm tracking, and it can buy you time to get into a shooting lane. When they hear the grunt and the movement, they'll stay longer. It can buy you time sometimes. And here he is just standing there, and I'm loading that gun. And of course, as soon as I pick it up and I'm going to put the cap on, away he goes. So he takes off running, and up the hill he goes. Well, I don't care about that little buck anymore. I could care less where he's gone. I'm going with the big one. Well, when I get up to where the big one was, he was standing in his bed. So he was up there bedded down, and this little buck went running right by him and continued up the hill. And he just stood up and was watching what the little one was running from. And it turns out it was me. And I don't know how much of me he saw, but he took off and away he went. Well, by the end of the day, that buck had done 12 of these like J hooks. He would pull up to some cover of some kind, like a big blowdown or a big rock pile or something like that. And he'd pull up to it and then do a hook and come back and watch for me. Now, by the third time I had jumped him, he'd seen me coming. He's starting to get the idea I'm trying to kill him. He's like, oh, I gotta go. I gotta go. Now, real big bucks won't necessarily run real hard. They just, especially if they've been chased a lot, they just keep steady. All they want to do is maintain that space between you and them. If they can maintain that space, they're good to go. And then after a while, when they're like 4, 5, 6 years old, they learn that. And they ease up a little bit because they'll bump into a lot of like hunters or problems. Like they'll pull up to a road and the truck will come and they'll have to run back from it. Right. There's all these little problems that the buck will pull up to. So now he's more careful when he gets to the road. He checks, make sure there's nobody coming, and then pulls up and checks again. And then he runs across the road. You can tell, right? Their habits. And when they're mature, they have these like habits that they will do. Now, the younger bucks, their programming is run, 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 right? Mom, the doe, come follow me. And if you've ever chased a doe any length of distance, she will blast off and show you the whole state. She will run and run and run. And of course, as a doe, when she trains her young fawns to do the same exact thing, we're out of here. And they freak. And a lot of younger bucks, like 2-year-olds, oh man, will they run. They will go and go. And that third time you jump them, you're going to be 4 hours maybe before they stop and slow down enough for you to get caught up to them again. Now, you're not going to run down a deer. That ain't happening. You know, their legs are just so good. But those bigger ones are really important, and they'll give you a chance. And of course, that was the time that I learned how particular bucks will have particular habits. And this one always did a right hand hook and look back. And sometimes they were 50 or 60-yard hook. And he'd
So
pull off to the side and watch.
he wasn't too far. He just wanted to get, like, when you're I'm trying to like translate kind of everything you're using in that scenario of tracking up in the mountains into like what some of our listeners maybe in the Midwest might be doing. And I mean, it makes total sense, right? As they get older, they want to work less and they want to have more advantages of survival. So instead of running and potentially running into another hunter or a pack of, like, instead of running into danger, that deer's going, hey, I know something's here. Let me get an advantage, visual, smell advantage. But when you're being chased, they can't work the wind into their favor all the time. So you do the J hook, watch your back trail, so I can do whatever I need to do to survive instead of running into the next 20 hunters who are going to do the same thing to me. So it makes total sense.
And of course, as I follow him, and now I'm on hook number 6, and we go down the hill, and I'm thinking to myself, well, he's either going to find a hunter, he's going to find some posted land, he's going to find a road, he's going to find some way of peeling me off. He's water, right? He's going to find something to try and get rid of me. Well, sure enough, I come over the hill and I see deer. And I said, oh, right there. I lean out. Oh, it's bald. I work my way down a little bit. Oh, there's another one over there. There were 6 deer in a group and they were all bald. And here I come and I'm looking and I don't see that buck anywhere. And I'm like, oh, you bugger. He went right down through them other deer. And I hate to go bumping them because I know he's going to go through those other deer and stop on the other side and watch their reaction to me to see if I'm
and when
still
they
coming.
go kicking through, he knows, yep, time for another one.
Yep.
Dirty dog.
So naturally, I'm like, well, over here is the way to go so the does won't smell me. They don't know I'm around yet. So I'll go around the does on the downwind side and now hunt that far side of those does and look for the track again. So I peel around and come down through that stuff. And oh, I almost shot him. Oh, it was close. I come through the brush and that bugger is about 35 yards standing, and I can just see a little bit of antler and a little tiny bit of tail, and there's not much to shoot at. I can see just like the black and white of his tail hanging, and I can see a little antler way up high, but there's a whole bunch of brush and I can't do anything about it. Now, at the time, I wasn't calling back then, but that would have been the time to grunt at him because of the other deer, and nothing is spooked.
Oh, yeah.
Yet. You might think I'm a buck. He could come back, or that might allow him to watch me long enough to get to where now I have a shooting lane and I can get him, right? And of course, I didn't do that back then. But in hindsight, now I'm saying, okay, watch their patterns, make sure you call when it would be appropriate. And then, of course, calling is going to reach a point where it won't work anymore. Like if you busted him twice calling, you ain't going to bust him 3 times. He's going to hear that call and he's gone, right? This buck is teaching me so many things. And by the end of the day, sure enough, he goes up into this little side hill and he's running out of space and he's going to have to circle home. He's made about probably a 2.5 mile big giant loop, and he's about 2/3 of the way through the loop. And he does another 90 degrees and goes up on the bank. And I said, oh, I bet there's another deer in there. And I go up the bank nice and easy. And boy, oh boy, right here someplace. And I look over and there's a deer hair laying in the snow. And I look and I squat down to look at it. And it's a little 4-pointer chewing his cud. And he's facing away from me. And I can see his horns and he's chewing his cud. And his horns are just moving as he's chewing his cud. And I look at that big one's track and it goes down here and back out into the hardwoods. And I look on the mountain on the other side from me and about 300 yards away, there he goes up through those hardwoods way over there. And I'm like, you bugger. And it's 4:30
Wow.
Saturday of muzzleloader season, right? And I'm like, okay, well, I guess this little 4-pointer is going home, right? So I boom into him. And then I'm like, I'll be back, right? And I never saw that buck again.
Oh, you can that is a cool story, and you can tell that deer has played a few other people probably in similar fashion,
for sure.
and how he's peeling off and getting you onto these other deer, getting you into the doe group, getting you into the little buck, and then making hay across an open area. Like, gosh, man, they are incredible. They're survivalists. They're not thinking the same way that we are when we're hunting them, but they sure as hell know how to evade just about anything.
But also, too, they are just a deer.
Yeah.
They're not a human being. And
No.
a lot of their reasoning is almost like opportunistic more than it is actual, like he's thinking it out and saying, how do I get rid of Rodney? Like he's not doing that. He's just running along and doing what he always did before. And he's just using like what would show up, places that he would normally go. He's running, it's home to him, and he's running his normal where he would go and what he would do. And all the things that he does have always worked for him. Even if you shot at him, you missed him, right? And he lived through it, or you wounded him and he lived through it, he still lived through it, right? So every time, he's a winner every time.
Yeah, I mean that's the only way they get to continue playing the game. And we always think as hunters that they're only playing the game during hunting season. But deer who live in the Northeast or in northern Wisconsin or Minnesota who have coyotes, wolves, black bears, bobcats, mountain lions, the deer are playing the damn game every minute of their life. It's not just when we're there. Like that's when we like to think about it, because that's, we're just that kind of thing. But these deer are playing that game every day. So it may be a little bit different, but they know what areas they can get away. Like they've got it figured out. A 5.5-year-old buck has survived that many days, that many, like they really, that's why when you were saying before, like that feeling you get when you have tracked down or hunted this buck and it's a big old deer that has evaded how many people, how many animals. There is no feeling like that when you truly understand what that deer has gone through. And it's almost sad when it does end, but like, man, that is about the best feat you can accomplish in deer hunting to me. Like, I don't care what the inches are. If you can do that like that's the cream of the crop right there. That's the cherry on top of the pie.
Absolutely, right. And the other thing too, now if I were to run that scenario through now, he should have been dead right when I first saw him. Right. The first problem I missed. Right. That was the first problem, is the first shot, which he should have been dead right there. Now, he wasn't the one I was after. It was a satellite deer, right? It wasn't, I was after the small one. He was an opportunity, right? And you're going to have lots of that if you track any amount. You'll have opportunity at other ones. And of course, they have a nose. And in the middle of country where there isn't many deer, he will lead you past all of his rubs, all of his scrapes, all of the other deer's rubs and scrapes, where they bed down, where the does go. He's going to show you all that countryside. So like if you just drop me or any of the guys in the Northeast that are used to doing this anywhere, like anybody who's a tracker of any kind, if you just drop them in the middle of Alberta with a fresh snow and said, go get a deer, they're going to see a deer by the end of the day. And odds are good. If there's a good one in that area right there, they'll find it in just a short while, especially between the truck or even like a four-wheeler. If you took a four-wheeler and you went for a ride and you just went looking for tracks crossing some road someplace and you said, oh, there's a deer right there and he's on this side, right? All of a sudden, those normal, like everyday tracking skills will just help you eliminate tons of territory, find that deer on that day, and now get a pretty good guess about where he is, and then hopefully just walk right up to him and shoot him. And a lot of times that's exactly how it is. Just walk right up to him and shoot him. And I've been on an elk hunt and got in there and said, nope, this is no good. And he's like, really? And I'm like, no, let's look. And then it snows. And it was 50 miles away. We could see snow. And I'm like, oh, that looks good over there. Let's go over there. We get over there, find a few tracks, pull up. Yep, there's definitely elk in here. Let's ride up the road. So we ride up the road and a whole herd goes across up high. And I'm like, well, there you go. Get out of the truck. Now you
Let's
can
go.
go, right? This is it right here. Being able to eliminate, the bad spots, find the good spots, and now figure out what that particular buck does. Now, on the second and third jump, he was starting to show a pattern, and he was doing it over and over and over. Now, if a deer keeps repeating a pattern and you don't do something about that, you're making a mistake, right? Now it's on you. Because if he keeps running the same little gully, if he keeps doing the same thing over and over and you don't take advantage of that, you're a slow learner, right? You want to get on that.
I'm going to be speaking a little bit different language than you here, but just that is something that I've been thinking about the past 2 years. So I'm where I live now. I grew up in northeastern Wisconsin, which is more big woods. I live in southeastern Wisconsin now, which is a lot of lowland, grassy, marshy, real thick, high density stem count. Like it's just a lot of terrain that's just nasty shit to walk through. It holds a lot of deer. There's way more deer than I've ever hunted up north, and there's big deer because these deer can hide. They can live there. They can not get killed. There's tons of pressure, but it's still almost impossible to get them out of there. And I got this spot that I'm running some trail cams. And I got this spot that's on the inside edge of this little marsh, and it's a way that people tend to access this public property. There's a big main trail that people come down, and then people slowly start filtering in toward some of the bigger woods. It's got some oaks, stuff that you can hunt, stuff that you see in the Real Tree movies, the pretty stuff. And I've got some cameras. Yeah, the people woods, where people want to hunt, not where the deer are, but where people would prefer to hunt. 100%. And I've got a camera that I've had there for 2 years now. And what I've noticed is I get some good buck movement through there on a pretty regular basis, but I get a lot of movement of some of the bigger ones running through, not running, but like moving through 9, 10 in the morning. And they get a lot of bird hunting pressure. And I know out there's some spots they like to bed, but I'm like, man, the last 2 years, I already got pictures from the summer of deer, big ones cruising through there on their way to this other back area. And it's like, this is their escape route. Like, maybe instead of just waiting, maybe I should have a couple of buddies bring their dogs and go walk through that shit. And I should just post up on that trail and use this pattern that I've noticed. It's how they escape. They go from this one area, they cut through this little thick shit, and then they got two options for where they want to go. It's exactly kind of what you were just saying about, the J hook. You once you see the pattern, that's the chink. It's probably the only chink in their armor you're going to get. Because they're, they're faster, they're better seeing, better smelling. You got to take advantage of whatever they give you. So shit, maybe I got to call some buddies and get some dogs out there.
A lot of times, like it like Tiger Woods says, you're 1/16 of an inch off, right? If you turn the club a 16th off, it's off a mile down there. So many times with deer hunting, we are so close and we're only off by just a little bit. Like, we're overlooking like one small spruce in the middle of that big swale grass. And that's where he beds down underneath that one tree way over there that you just kind of ignored. And I look at it on the satellite and I'm like, oh, right there. Walk into that spruce tree and there's the bed right there. It's like, oh, you bugger, that's the spot, right? And of course, they're at home everywhere. It doesn't matter where they are, and they can make it everywhere. But of course, they'll learn spots, they'll learn things that work for them, and then sometimes they get lucky. They happen to have a blowdown cover them when they ran off and you didn't get a shot.
Yeah.
Something stupid where you were screwed and they're not. And then sometimes they're screwed and you're not. So like, that's the other thing I got about chasing this buck is because I moved him, I started figuring out where I was done for. And in the third spot, there was no way I was going to get anywhere near him without him knowing about it. And so what do? Do I just stand there all day and hope and pray that he does something and he lays down and watches for the rest of the day and nothing happens? No, I'm not going to just him sit there, me sit there and the whole season. No, he's going to get up, right? He's not going to stay there. We'll move him to someplace, hopefully where he is screwed, right? And when you have the space, that's one of the things about this method though. It doesn't mean that you wouldn't use tracking on 10 acres. Because like in Vermont, I have 100 acres here, right? And if I want to know if there's a deer on my land, I start on the downwind side of my property line. And I walk with snow on the downwind side of my property line. And I go see if something came onto my land or if something left my land or it's gone both ways. Or if there's a buck checking some of my does, I'll circle the outside and then work my way through it. And if I hit a track, now I'll hunt him on my land as best I can. Up to where hopefully I know where he beds. I know the land well, so I know where to walk. And if I see the track is going right here and he's going to get me, I know don't walk there, hook this way, right? Because you know the landscape. So like sometimes I don't really need to scout all that much because he's going to show me where all the does are, where the scrapes are, where other bucks go, all of that stuff. And then of course over the years, you learn the woods, you learn different bucks patterns, you learn just general buck crossing spots like yours, right? You figure a few of those out, and then when you go hunting with other people and you all share your information, well, now you're 7 times on it even more. And when you have 2 or 3 trucks and 3 or 4 guys and you all spread out on the landscape and you each take a 10-mile area and go hooking through it, just looking for a big one. If you say, okay, I just want a 200-pounder. So we go out and we just start looking for 200 and we don't find 200, we're out of there. So we'll just keep looking and going and searching. And then at the end of the day, if you're sharing your information between all you guys and you find something, you say, okay, we got one over here and one over on this valley and one on this mountain way over here. And there's another one over there. So when the snow gets good again, say the snow melted and it's gone, but now it's back, well, we'll go in those spots and go look for him, so it gives you 5 or 6 that you can go and check out. You might get there and someone else is already tracking him, right? They got out of bed earlier or whatever, and they're tracking him now. And it's like, well, good luck, buddy. And hopefully he'll catch up to it. If I know that he's going to go through this bottle, right? Say there's a big notch and that guy's following it up towards the notch and he goes through that notch every time. I can drive around the mountain and get on the other side of the notch. Well, that's a good place to go. If
jump in front, yeah.
Common sense, right? If you get your bird hunting buddies out there, you know where to walk. So like that's going to come together for you, over time. And if you're not too scared of being out in big woods, not too scared of learning how to navigate and understand it. And then I worry about getting the deer out once he's dead.
I've got so many buddies who some of the areas you go look at, and I mean, some of the stuff is not nearly the scale that you guys are dealing with. And it's like, man, well, it's a good spot, but how would I get one out? And it's like, that is the wrong mentality. Your goal is to kill a big deer. Go where you need to go to kill the big. You're already wrong.
Finding a big deer. Oh yeah, finding that big deer, that's a hard part.
Yeah.
That's the hard part. Getting it out of the woods, that's nothing.
I had a question for you, and I don't know if you guys do. I would imagine just because you guys hunt hard during the season. So if you don't have snow and you've got bare ground, Are you like going back to those areas where bucks have like showed you in the past? You know what I mean? Like through tracking, you must be going through little areas, saddles, bogs or whatever, where you just say, oh man, it looks like multiple bucks have been through here. There's all sorts of rubs, old rubs. Is that where you're kind of like going to like start or like pick up tracks, or what are you kind of doing to tackle that situation?
Well, of course, because we're deer hunting for almost 6 weeks straight, every day, like it's your job, right? You're going to have something happen, right? Anybody hunted for a whole month straight, nonstop, like it was your job, something's going to happen. I don't care what your method is. It's almost pretty tough not to run into a buck of some kind.
Yeah.
But if you go back to where you were the years before and you knew that there were some pretty good bucks in them, and like say you did know the saddle, or there's a community scrape or a signpost rub or any of those spots where other bucks are likely to come through, you can run down and check them with bare ground. Run down in there and check them. I'm looking for at least, I want to see a big, huge track somewhere. I don't care if it's on the side of a dirt road. Just show me one big monstrous track someplace so I know that there's a big one here. And that gives me a basis to start looking. Now, I'm also going by the timing of the rut. If it's, say, the first week in November and their velvet's off and they don't really like other bucks, they got a little attitude towards the other bucks, they might lay down a little bit of sign close to where they hang out between the food and the bedding, where their normal little home range kind of thing is going on that first week in November, the 1st to the 7th or so. That week there, if I go in and I see one big track on the side of the road and it's going over here, well, I'm gonna go walk down in there and look around for some sign. If you find any fresh buck sign, I'm gonna hunt hard within a quarter mile of that sign. I'm gonna take my time, walk around, guess where he would be bedded. Now, see, that's one of the other things about the way we hunt compared to I am headed to every bedding area I can find. Now, everyone else with small parcels and not wanting to disturb the deer, and they want them to
They don't want to do that.
They don't want to disturb them. I'm the exact opposite. He is not going to sleep today. He's going to get up. So we go in there and we get him up, right? And it doesn't matter if it's 10 o'clock in the morning. Hey, whatever. I just want to see him and put a bullet in him. And I want to figure out where he's hanging. Now, if I bust him out of there, I could care less. If I bust him from some spot, good, whatever, doesn't matter. I'll keep looking. And when the snow comes, we'll just, then we can say, okay, he's in here today. But either way, even if I bust him in that first week, which is what we did this last season, we went up on the very first day. We get up there, Ryan and
Do you guys open? Does your rifle season open, or your gun season, firearm, November 1st?
Yes. Yep.
Okay. I wasn't sure. I just wanted to ask.
Yeah, we had pretty much the whole month of November, right up to Thanksgiving. And then right after Thanksgiving, muzzle starts into the first week in December.
Okay. Sorry.
So we're about 5 weeks or so. And this last season, there's a giant. And I said to Ryan, if we're going anywhere, I want to go to over where that boy is. That's the one. So we drive in there and we're walking up in the woods. And I said to him, he likes to come down the edge of these pine up here, where the hardwood and the pine come together is where he always goes back and forth, and that's where we're going to start. We didn't even get in the woods 150 yards, and about 60, 80 yards in front of us, that bugger is standing there when we walk right in on the first day, first thing, right out of the truck.
Probably not what you expected.
And of course, he blows at us and runs off, and Ryan can't get a shot. And I'm like, shoot that thing. And away it goes. We never saw him again for the rest of the season. And we hunted, we chased after him a fair amount, but we never saw him again. That was our like one chance right out of the gate. So first part of November, if it is bare ground like that, I'm going to go back and concentrate on those spots where I knew there was a pretty good one before. Most of the time, a good buck spot is a good buck spot, right? Like if you shot one out of that area, within the next 3-4 years, there'll be another one there. There may be another one there in the next week. Right. So you can go back and check some of them. If the conditions change, if you're not finding what you want, get out of there. Right. I am not afraid to abandon a spot. Being a taxidermist, I talk to hundreds and hundreds of hunters, and some of them will religiously sit in the same place, expecting the same experience they had 20 years ago to happen in that spot again. and it's pretty rare that it does. So like I don't want to limit myself in that way. There's a learning curve that went with that, and I didn't want to do that. So I'll go back to those key spots where we knew there was big buck. Now that doesn't mean I'm not looking in all the time. Like I'm looking in between all those other spots all the time, always paying attention to what could be good sign. I love to go up and down rivers, especially when the water is real low. If I don't have snow, I'll go up and down rivers and look for tracks in the dirt where they're going across the river, they're going down to the river. There's something about open sand. Even we do it. We come to a river and it's just a sandbar. We can't wait to run out on the sandbar. Turkeys, right? They run out on the sandbar and they walk. Yeah, exactly. So like that is a great place to look for it. Newly graded dirt roads. Those are almost as good as snow. Like if the grader went through 2 days before, I'm checking that side of that road. I'm going to walk the side of the road for miles and look, or drive super slow and look out the truck window and look for a track in that brand new dirt all the way up through there. And especially if it's only been a couple of days. If it graded like a week ago and then it just barely rained 2 days ago, you'll see the difference between the earlier part of the week and the later part of the week
older
in
tracks.
the track. And now I can say, okay, and if I find one track and it's kind of old, but it's going that way, and then I drive up 100 yards and I see a brand new track going that way, 2 days, right? Over here, right? All of a sudden, my deer meter is pointing that way, right? The way you go.
Yeah, definitely.
I just kind of, I go out and I get a feel for that. And now I want to see tracks. I want to see some sign of some kind in that first week in November. When you get into the second and third week, that kind of pre-rut zombie walking time, when you get into that part of it, they're going to be walking like crazy, and there'll be way more tracks. They'll do more circulating. Some of the GPS collar studies, and when you watch it move, inside of his zone during the rut and where he goes, it's so interesting how a buck uses the landscape, and it goes to show how much more they're using it. They're doing triple the walking. So as they start going through those little choke points, of habitat where where they feel safe to keep crossing back and forth, those little pinch points, like your pinch point you have, that's the time to keep going back and checking those and hunt those kind of nice and slow and easy. Still hunt those, look it over, downwind side of things, go nice and easy. You might bump right into them right in the middle of the day. And a lot of times, if I know, say it's a real hot day, like 60 degrees, and it's sunny and there's no wind and it's kind of hot feeling, and here's a northern side of the mountain all covered in spruce and it's nice and cool and it's quiet walking. It's not noisy walking like over here. Odds are good he's up in that spruce somewhere. And I go walking up in and I just point. I just use your karma, right? And say, right here, and then go there and wham, and there's the thing right there, and boom, and you get them. So sometimes that'll work out as well too, right? Where you're just lining up all of your feelings, you're lining up your knowledge, and like that's how planet Earth works, right? You dream, you do the right thing at the right time, and you get a miracle. That's how this whole planet works that way. That's how you get a pickup.
It's the alignment. Right? Yeah, the alignment of positivity and the manifestation of, those positive thoughts that you're thinking. I swear I've seen that in one of your videos, Rodney. Yep. It was like a side hill of an old logging road, and you were talking about how you thought the buck was just going to be doing that, and like you split up from your son tail. I don't remember how it went down because I watched it a little while ago, but then you literally like shot it exactly as you had just explained it or like mentioned it, and I was just like, God dang it, that was awesome. But it's what you just said. It literally was.
If you look at a lot of different hunters, like I spend a lot of time watching hunters. I'm a taxidermist, right? And I listen and I watch them all the time. And of course, because I grew up around wild all the time, nature's not a big deal to me. I've studied nature till I'm like sick of it. Like I don't care about it anymore. People are almost like more interesting now. And I spent a lot of time studying people. And of course, you have to study yourself a lot in order to handle studying people because they're kind of different, right? You got to know yourself good and not take it personal. But when I watch all kinds of different hunters come in the shop, there's two successful hunters. There's the guy who forces it and the guy who lets it happen. Now, if if you're a bass fisherman and you have this $80,000 boat and you have 5 fishing rods and 27 different kinds of lures and all the stuff, and you've studied it and you understand it and you go to tournaments and you can drive up to any lake and you know the patterns and you figure it out and you go bang, bang, bang. And then once you figure it out, you just keep right here, right here, right here, right here. And it's intense, right? Like you're forcing it to happen, and it just does. And it's successful. It is very successful. You have to have discipline. You have to know what you're doing, and you have to do the right thing at the right time. And you do get the miracle. Or you can be the fisherman who takes his time and walks down to the dock and he sets down his bucket and he gets out his fishing pole and he throws the thing out, and he's there at the right time, right? That dawn, right? And he chucks it out there and he sits out in his lawn chair and he takes up the slack and he's just sitting there and he's shooting the breeze with a guy, and that fish bites and he goes skunk and he's got it and he reels it in, throws it in the bucket, and he fills it back up and chucks it back out again. And then he goes back to doing his thing and they bite it again. And the second they do, he's got it and he goes home with a bucket full of fish too, right? They both work. They're both successful. One is more intense and it makes you responsible for what happens. You have to be intense and disciplined, and you have to do the right thing, and you have to have, like, there's all these rules and you have to work in the rules. The other guy walks down with no rules and he's relaxed and he goes clunk, but he's paying attention and he goes dunk and I got him. And he, like, there's an intense way and a not so intense way. And everyone tries to force it sometimes. And if you don't have the discipline, it's tough, right? And when the conditions don't seem to be lining up with your rules, now you can't play. I can't go there because there's a million guys, right? Oh, there's too many guys. I can't go there. Oh, there's too much snow. Oh, the woods are too deep, right? You'll hear all these like excuses because they have all these rules, right? So there's a difference in gladiators of ones who can handle the chaos of totally wild, totally public, go out there, no cameras, no nothing, just walk out there with your karma and point at the green wall and then hit a home run, right? There's a difference between the guy who does that and the guy who's real intense and forces it. Now, they both are successful, and you can do it by forcing it. A lot of people are forcing it, but they're not forcers, right? They're more laid back. And the kid, his first time with a pole, boom, got one, right? And you say, well, it's a kid, right? Like, he didn't even know what he was doing. He did it by accident. We say, oh, he did it by accident. Doesn't matter. He got it, right?
I think
did it soft and easy.
I'm going to go out on a limb, and because I've seen much of the same thing in my experiences with exactly what you're talking about. And as a taxidermist, I'm going to go out on a limb and say you probably get a fair amount of large deer that are taken by first time or beginner hunters who just kind of had right. And you're like sitting in the stupid spot, in the weird spot, but had the right, just had whatever little thing it was that was going on and have made it happen, because I've seen that happen a lot. And then, you know, what gets the real intense force guy pissed off real quick is when somebody like the other guy gets a real nice deer and they didn't when they've been trying to force it, right? Nothing is a recipe for a pissed off guy kicking rocks in a parking lot. Like the guy who's forcing it so hard and didn't do it right. And then you got some guy who just was out there to enjoy and he got it done.
There's a little bit of ego involved, right? I see plenty of that as a tag. It's been 40 years of doing taxidermy. So like every kind of hunter, I've met them all. There's probably 25% that are talking accidental like you were saying, you know, where they went deer hunting, they just wanted a deer, and here comes a beauty, and they go bang, and like there it is. And they may even write themselves off and say, oh, I'll never do that again. That's the biggest thing. I don't stand a chance. And I'm like, no, you're on a roll, right? You went out with a good feeling. You had something splendid happen to you, and now you're on a roll. It should continue, right? Your good karma matters as well. That matters like crazy, because when you feel good, you do your best work. You pay your best attention. You shoot your best. Your game face is on when you feel good. I think it's one of the reasons why everybody likes our YouTube channel, is because it makes you feel good, which is kind of how we are. We do our best to make ourselves feel good about what we're doing all the time. And that's very important, because you do your best work then. You're your most authentic self. And that's
100%.
important, because when you're being true to you, the deer can't wait to die for you, right? It's like, how do you want to think about it? I want to think about it as big bucks want me to shoot them. They just want me to shoot them. Like and I'll have a million guys come in the shop, and they're like, them deer are so smart and they run so hard and I can't get them. And it's like, well, your thoughts about how deer hunting should be would be like math being easy, not math being hard. Right? How should you think about math? How should you think about deer hunting? If you think about it as tough and hard, guess what you're going to get? Tough and hard, right? So, like, you're better off to say to that young person when you bring them out in the woods, it's easy. It may not be at first, but here we go. And let's just go see what happens. And that was one of my favorite things to the boys. Let's just go see. Let's just go see. Let's just go. Let's not think about it too much. Let's just go see. And then afterwards, they're like, yeah, another 3/8 of a mile, Dad, right?
Well, hey, you just go see. You never know.
Let's just go see. And then all of a sudden, oh, there it is. And I'd say, oh, it's right here. And then boom, and they would get it. And they were like, you're right. You know, of course, nature is chaos, right? There's nothing 100%. If anything, it's probably like Mother Nature is like 0 and 00, right? You have blacks and reds. You either win or you lose. But nature has the 0 and 00, and she plays some of those roles, right? She rolls. Oh, you got bad weather today. Oh, it's windy. Boom, right? You know, it didn't snow. It rained, right? She throws in these things. And, of course, being the gladiator in the arena, you have to be able to handle and walk with those things and still keep your karma up and still keep everything going and keep trying. And then all of a sudden it comes together.
And it's such a beautiful thing. And it really is it is the most effective tactic you can bring in the woods is your mindset. And I'm not even thinking about it. Like, if anyone's listening and is like, what is Rodney saying? I just got to think I'm going to kill a big one and a big one's going to come. It's more, if you believe that it can happen and you're not the guy who's like, oh, they're going to go too far. They're going to go. Everything you do, the decisions you make are so influenced by that inner subconscious of either this is too hard or it could happen. And if you have it could happen, every little small detail of maybe I should look over there, maybe I should circle around instead of just, keep hammering on, head down, like it all those little tiny subconscious things about with the karma you're mentioning, like that absolutely is the number one tactic. And I've done it before where I've gotten negative talk in my head about something. And then, of course, that's like when it shows up. And then I'm not mentally prepared to do what I need to do. Right? Like,
and you knew it was going to happen. Right? Afterwards, I knew that was going to happen.
Why did I do that?
Well, see,
why did I do that?
The solid proof of that is that the man who says I can and the man who says I can't, they're both right. Now, do you want to go out there and say you can, or do you want to go out and say you can't? Right?
That mindset is
no
more
try, like Yoda says. No try. You have to either do or do not, right? So when you
that's
take
where
those 2 lines, you're good to go.
And we'll wrap up here, Rodney. We've been going for a while here, but I love that mindset so much. And I think that's where, like, the force it guy that you've kind of mentioned on social media, and it's not everywhere. Not all hunters are doing this, but there's such a presence of it in so much social media groups. And you probably don't see a ton of it because you guys don't do a lot of like tree stand hunting, but we've become such a gear oriented cell cam trail. Like, having a positive attitude is better than having 600 pictures of a big buck. Like having a never give up. I don't care where it dies because I'll drag it out. That is more powerful than having the lightest tree stand on the market. Like, we become this force it generation where if I just buy enough stuff or have enough gadgets, it's going to work for me. And it might, but really you're doing yourself a disservice because, like, the hunting is about you and the animal, not the other shit. It really is about you and nature. That's it.
Well, sure. And like Yoda doesn't care what color the lightsaber is, right? It's not going to
I
care
love
about
that.
like what caliber gun and do I have the right kind of tree stand and is my GPS the perfect thing? Now, those things are nice tools. And when you
Oh, for
know how
sure.
to use them well, there's nothing wrong with that, right? It's good to know your equipment, to trust it and know what you're doing. Absolutely. And good equipment is great, but it will never ever make up for the concentrated mental focus and effort that you would put in not only to being successful, but also to have a good time. You want your concentrated mental effort to be on having a good time. Now, the reason that's so important is it keeps you up.
Mm-hmm.
Having a good time is what keeps your mental thing up. And of course, we need to sometimes get in the mood of doing what we're doing because the outside conditions may not be that way. It's raining, right? So the outside mental conditions are trying to break us down. But that guy who sticks with it and keeps going, he's the one I'm doing the taxidermy for all the time, right? Now, I want to say 25% are probably happenstance, and they shot one of the biggest bucks they've ever gotten just by luck or whatever. But they were out there, right? You make your luck because you were prepared and opportunity showed up and you made the most of it, right? Now, then there's also a group that are real forcers, and these are the clients you will have every year because they'll get a big one every year. They're committed to their rules. They know what works for them, and they just go out and they keep doing it, right? They're the clients who just kill a big buck every year because they've got it down and they've gotten a pattern, and they've applied it and made it work. And then there's a few upstarts to that. Like the young
Oh,
guy who came to some of the classes, he went through my hunter safety 10 years ago, and now he's gathering this information. See, that's one of the good things about the social media is you learn from all different kinds of people. You can learn even what not to do, and you learn when you want to learn it, when you're interested, and you learn it from who you want to learn it from. Like no other learning is going to beat the internet in many ways because you can get the information when, how, and how from who that you really want to, and when you're ready. And when you're ready for it and you gather it, and now you can take the information and put it to work for you and make it work just for you, right? Because what might work for me might not work for somebody else, right? Teaching is dangerous business. You might be wrong, right? So like this having a telescoping effect on the learning will speed up the process. We won't need tons and tons of hunters because the ones we have will be on it.
yeah.
They'll
And
learn.
I love that way you describe those different methods of receiving information. And I think that's one of the reasons. I mean, it's a common joke that, everybody and their grandma has a podcast now because there's a million podcasts out there like the one we're talking on right now. But
Right.
and there's reason for it though, because not only do you want to learn different tactics from different people or different scenarios, but people have different ways of obviously explaining that information. So you could listen to 5 different people about the same tracking tactics, but
Yep.
one person the way they described it, it made the picture so clear to me. Whereas the other people, I didn't get what they were saying. So like those different avenues, I mean, it's just everyone's just trying to find their way and figure out what's going to work for them. As you mentioned there, that man, I love the tangent we went on at the end. That was excellent. Um, Rodney's been about an hour and 20 minutes. It's late for you. it's getting late for me, so I know it's late for you. So I
No
got to
big
go to
deal.
school in the morning. I think it's about time we wrap it up. I really want to thank you for sitting down with us this evening. I really
Sure.
enjoyed the conversation. I appreciate it a lot. Where do you have anywhere that you want to direct any of our listeners who have not seen your stuff before? Where can they find you and consume some of your content and information?
Yeah. Well, of course, we have Mountain Deer taxidermy.com, so they can go on our website for the shop and stuff. And then we have the YouTube channel Mountain Deer, and of course on Facebook, Rodney Elmer and the Mountain Deer Crew. Same thing with Rodney Elmer on Facebook itself. We put out a fair amount of videos as best we can. We're arborists and taxidermists and loggers and everything else. So we're right out straight, most of the year, and we are only into so much deer hunting, and then we're done, right? So
Yeah.
we put out as much content as we can. We really enjoy ourselves. We have a lot of fun, and it's really humbling how well it's been received. Taylor talked me into doing the YouTube thing, and I was like, no, who cares, So, and I don't think that many people will care. But he's like, no, Dad, we really should do it. And I think at Huntstock, I signed 36 hats from kids.
Wow. That's
So
awesome.
like that's quite a feeling, and it's humbling, and I appreciate it so much, and glad to share our thoughts, with everybody. And I'm glad everyone shares their thoughts with us as well. It's a good thing. I don't know. I think about Matt Ranella, right? And him saying, hunt quietly and don't go social media. And then his brother's the opposite, right? And Steve is doing so much good as well, right? So at some point it is just hunting, and it is just go and have fun and make the most of what you can. And it's not about your deer, it's more about you. And that's what the channel has been about. And when I'm in the nursing home, I'll say, who are these guys? And I'll watch myself, then I'll have a record of our lives, and maybe my great grandchildren can watch it, right?
That's the thing, right? Like these are recorded, published memories of you and your family. And if you guys, any of our listeners want to see like the proof in the pudding, watch some of the YouTube. You will see more smiling hunters than any other YouTube hunting video. Like I've never met your son, Taylor. I've obviously never met, but like Taylor is smiling almost every second that he is in the video. You guys have fun and it comes through. And that's why people are excited, because hunting sometimes becomes this thing that people put pressure on themselves to produce animals, when really you're out there to enjoy yourself and the company you're with. And you guys bring that to the table. And it's a good reminder to people. And I love watching the hunting stuff too, but that's one of the reasons that I love watching what you guys do. So thanks a lot for joining us tonight, Rod. I really appreciate it. And we'll stay in touch and hopefully see some big bucks, you guys, big bucks and smiles from this season coming ahead of us.
Same to you. Get a big one.
We'll try.
All righty.
Have
fun.
All right. Thanks a lot, Rodney.
No problem. So long.